Hello, this is Amanda Cleland, and we are going to be talking in supply chain management about warehouse management, section 6, and this is the second part of warehouse management. So let's get started. Okay, so some of the most important warehousing decisions that face supply chain executives and organizations in general are the location of the warehouses. Where are we going to place the warehouses? The size of the warehouses, how big are they going to be? And then the number of warehouses. How many warehouses are we going to have? These are some of the biggest warehousing decisions that face an organization: the location, the size, and the number of the warehouses that we are going to have. So let's talk first about location. So selecting the right warehouse location can make all the difference in how effective, how efficient, and how profitable we are as a company. Choosing the right location or the right many locations can significantly enhance our company's ability to compete with our competitors and effectively serve our customers. So we want to figure out where we want to put our warehouses, the location. So warehouses should be geographically within an organization's supply and distribution channels. We want to ensure that wherever our supply and distribution channels are, we have our warehouses located within this geographic region, because we want them to be able to support our organizational strategies, maintain our business continuity, and ideally minimize the total cost of receiving, of storing, and transportation of all the inventory in our supply chain. So let's do a little quiz here. We've got a map of the United States right here. Now, where do you think is the best place to build a warehouse, one single warehouse, that could service the greatest number of US customers? Again, we're only going to build one warehouse in the United States. Where should we build it in order to minimize the distance and transportation time to all customers throughout the United States? So we've had some guesses, and a lot of people are looking at the Midwest. They're looking at Missouri, they're looking at Iowa, they're looking at Kansas, somewhere in the Midwest. And that makes sense, right? Kind of equidistant to all corners of the United States. So let's find out what the answer is in terms of where, if we're going to build one warehouse in the entire United States, where would we build it in order to minimize distance and transportation time to all customers? So the answer is, it is in the Midwest. It is Vincennes, Indiana. Vincennes, Indiana, so it's kind of in the southwest corner of Indiana, bordering Illinois. This would be closest on average to the majority of US population rather than any other location in the entire United States if we're only going to build one single warehouse. It's the best location for a single warehouse based on the lowest possible lead times to all US customers, which with an average lead time of about 2.31 days. Any other location in the United States, if we were to place a single warehouse, that would increase the average transit time for all possible customers within the United States. So again, this is something we want to look at. We want to see, how do we ensure that we have the lowest possible lead times and the lowest possible cost of transportation? So again, questions we have to ask ourselves as supply chain professionals. So if we wanted to locate our facilities closest to our potential customers using one or more warehouses, there's a number of different sites. Again, we talked about, if we only wanted one warehouse in our network, Vincennes, Indiana would be the best location for just one. Now, if we wanted two warehouses, there would be two possible locations that would be mathematically the optimal places. So that would be Ashland, Kentucky, and Porterville, California. And you can see here, as we increase the number of warehouses in our network to 3, 4, 5, 6, the warehouse locations, the optimal locations to minimize average lead time changes depending on how many warehouses we have. So again, you can see how this would be very important in terms of making these types of decisions. So site selection decision in terms of location, can be approached from both a macro, kind of a big picture perspective, and a micro perspective, kind of a more smaller scale perspective. So macro perspectives examine the issue of where in a general area to locate warehouses geographically, ideally to improve the sourcing of our input materials and our market offering. We want to improve our service or reduce costs to our customers. Again, macros looking at like the big picture, where in a general area. For the United States, are we looking at Midwest? Are we looking at Northeast? Are we looking at, where in terms of like big picture? Now, a micro perspective gets much smaller in terms of the scope. A micro perspective looks at factors that pinpoint very specific locations within the larger geographic areas. So in terms of the macro perspective, so Edgar M. Hoover, he was one of the leading pioneers in the field of location analysis. And I'll note that his middle initial M is very important here. There's an Edgar Hoover who was actually head of the FBI for a long time. This is not the same individual, so it's Edgar M. Hoover. He was essentially an economist, and in 1948, he wrote something called The Location of Economic Activity, and that compiled a lot of very crucial criteria of industrial site selection that still apply today. These types of concepts that he developed in terms of where we should put our industrial sites, manufacturing, warehouses, where we should put these. And in his macro approach, Edgar Hoover identified 3 types of big location strategies: the market position strategy, the production position strategy, and the intermediately positioned strategy. So in the market position strategy, this is where we are going to locate our warehouse close to our final customer. This strategy is usually recommended where there are very high levels of competition, and there's a lot of flexibility in the distribution. It minimizes that outbound transportation cost of sending our final inventory out to our customers. So we want to be wherever our customers are, we want to be right by them in terms of where our warehouses are located. Market position strategy, we want to be close to the market, close to our final customer. In a production position strategy, this is where we are going to locate our warehouses close to the sources of supply or our production facilities. Now, when I say sources of supply, usually that entails our suppliers' facilities. So we're going to place our warehouses very close to our suppliers' facilities or our own production or manufacturing facilities. So this minimizes the inbound transportation costs, where we are going to have our warehouse right next to our factory or right next to our supplier's factory. Again, the cost for transporting all of those inbound materials is going to be much lower with a production position strategy. We want to be close to the source of production. And then the intermediately positioned strategy. This is kind of the best of both worlds. This is where we're going to meet halfway. We're going to place our warehouse midway between the source of supplier production and the final customers. So customer service levels for these warehouses are usually typically higher than for production position facilities, and they are lower than for market position facilities. When I say customer service levels, I'm usually referring to customer lead time, how long it takes us to get that final product to our end customer in terms of customer service level, how long that takes. And a firm or a company often follows this strategy if it has to offer really high customer service levels, but it has a varied product offering. that's being produced at several different plant locations. So they really don't have one single manufacturing plant or one single source of supply. They've got them kind of scattered around. So this is where we're going to kind of combine both strategies and place our warehouses in the middle between those sources of supply or production, our factories or our suppliers' factories, and between our final customers. Halfway, intermediately positioned strategy. Now let's talk about micro. So again, this is where we're going to look at more, we're going to pinpoint more of the specific factors about exactly where. Once we've made a macro decision, we've got to figure out from a micro perspective exactly where we are going to locate our warehouse. So from a micro perspective, we've got to look at more specific factors. We've got to examine these. So things like rental or purchase costs. How much does it cost us to actually have a warehouse? The cost and quality of the industrial land, costs of construction, the cost and availability of utilities. Do they already have electrical lines or sewage set up? The labor availability. Is there a good labor pool in the nearby area? The labor rates. Is there a lot of unionized where it's going to be higher rates, a high cost of living? What are the roads? What are the highways? What are the traffic flows look like? Is it very difficult to get on the highway? Is there a lot of traffic? What is the quality and the variety of all the transportation carriers that can serve the site? What are the local environmental factors? What is our potential for expansion? If we know we're going to grow, do we have the ability to do so at this location? What does the building codes look like? What about the tax structure? We've got to think about all these local government considerations. So there are a lot of different things from a micro perspective to kind of pinpoint exactly where we're going to locate our warehouse. So let's talk first about rent or purchase cost. So rent or purchase cost is a key factor here when selecting the right location of a warehouse. So in terms of the United States, the very high cost markets, places like San Francisco, San Jose, the Bay Area, the New York metropolitan area, Long Island, San Diego, these are places where it is very expensive to rent or purchase any warehouse space. And then on the other hand, we've got very low cost markets, usually kind of in the South region of the United States. So Memphis, Dallas, Fort Worth, Atlanta, these are all very, at least for the time being, they're all very affordable places to have a warehouse. So the average rental prices in the United States can vary wildly. They can be low as $2.56 per square foot per year and as high as $16.50 square foot per year in terms of how much it's going to cost. So almost 8 times as much it can vary. So again, when we're looking at where we're going to locate our warehouses, again, the Southwest, the Southeast United States typically has the lowest prices in terms of what it takes to buy or rent. Memphis, Dallas, Fort Worth, Atlanta, Nashville, Jacksonville, Savannah. These are all very cheap places to have a warehouse, relatively speaking. And then on our other end of the spectrum, we've got our very high cost areas. So again, this is going to cost an arm and a leg to rent or purchase a facility, a warehouse facility here. So San Francisco, California, coming in at the most expensive. Honolulu, Hawaii, Miami, Florida, San Diego, California, Orange County, California, Long Island, New York. Again, a lot of these places are, beautiful weather, beautiful in terms of things to do, but again, very, very expensive to open a warehouse. So we've got to think about what is the cost of opening a warehouse in some of these locations. Then we've got to think about labor availability, skills, and rates. Not every geographic location offers a workforce with the right skills and at the right price. We've got to pay attention to the local demographics of the state and of the city that's being considered. If we're opening a warehouse in a very highly educated area, again, a lot of warehouse workers don't typically need high levels of education. So maybe this is not the right place. If the labor availability is not there for more unskilled, lesser educated people, it may not make sense to open a warehouse there. A low workforce availability, so the supply of workers, with a very high demand is going to drive wages up, meaning that our operating costs are going to be higher. And we've got to think about union presence as well. Locations where there's a really strong union presence generally means that workers will likely vote for some sort of representation, which is going to result in higher wages and benefit costs for us. We've got to look at the labor pool of the local area as well, and what kind of skills they have, and what kind of rates, the going rates of these laborers as well. And besides the workforce availability and cost, the skills that they have are critical. A workforce skill gap, if the local labor pool does not have the skills we need, that's going to result in a really low quality of customer service and a reduction in our competitiveness and productivities. So before we actually go about opening a warehouse in a specific location, we've got to do our due diligence. We've got to research the demographics and look at things like educational attainment, the population characteristics, and kind of the income levels of the local population before we move forward with any kind of decision. So roads, highways, and traffic flows. So accessibility to roads and highways, as well as the local traffic density, really has to be considered, especially if trucking is the main mode of transportation. And usually in the United States, with any kind of warehousing, trucking is the main mode of transportation. So we've got to look at things like, do we have accessibility to a highway? How heavy is the traffic? So what is the public transportation? What is the average traffic speed? What is the traffic volume? What are the traffic peak hours? I used to live in certain locations where if you would leave during rush hour, it would take you 2 additional hours to get to your final destination than if you left at any other hour. Proper road signs and signals, road safety and conditions. Are the roads really messed up and there's going to be ongoing construction for the next decade? We've got to look at the roads because, again, in the United States, the primary mode of transportation is probably going to be trucking, and these trucks are going to need to transport on the roads. So the roads nearby our warehouse are a huge consideration. So we've got to think about like factors like congested highways, congested surface roads. What if there's really poor signaling systems? The lights don't work very well. These are all going to increase our fuel consumption, our accident rates, our time wasted, and essentially more money. So transportation costs are affected by all of these variables. And again, this is going to impact our competitiveness of our company or the attractiveness of the warehousing facility to customers. Then we've got to look at the local environmental factors. And I'm talking both in terms of like the actual physical environment, like Mother Nature, and kind of the local societal and governmental environment as well. So we've got to look at local environmental factors like the weather conditions or the risk of exposure to natural disasters that we need to consider here. So with climate change, global warming, we are seeing an increase in the frequency and intensity of natural disasters. When deciding the location of our warehouse, is it going to be exposed to places of high risk like hurricanes, tornadoes, or earthquakes? Is it in a flood zone? For any of these risks, a lot of times if things are in a flood zone or they're in areas that get earthquakes, the warehouse may need to meet certain building requirements, building codes. So maybe it's more expensive to build a new warehouse because of these building requirements due to the risk of natural disaster. We also have to think, is that warehouse in an area of very high crime? Are workers going to be afraid to come to work, scared that they're going to get mugged in the parking lot? So we've got to think about the crime rates as well. And then government considerations. So attention has to be given to local government regulations, the tax structure, and tax incentives. We see this a lot because different US states have different ways of treating corporations in terms of their taxes. We see a lot of companies now that are relocating their manufacturing facilities or their headquarters to different states based on tax reasons. We're seeing this a lot in California. We see it also in Illinois, where we reside. where companies are leaving and moving to other places. Specifically, Texas seems to come to mind, where a lot of companies are moving. So our company, we could benefit from special local government programs intended to promote our segment. So a lot of times, to try to bring in any kind of new business, new industry, new jobs to their areas, a lot of government officials are willing to offer significant tax breaks and other financial incentives to companies that come in and open facilities, including warehouses. So some of these incentives could include like income tax credit, tax exemption, or financial help with things like land acquisition or like site improvements. So if there is a location in terms of a micro location that is offering big financial incentives, big tax breaks for us to open a warehouse, we have to take this into consideration. So some examples of some companies that have really prospered from looking at local government considerations. So in the last 5 years, the New Jersey Economic Development Authority has awarded $230 million in tax incentives to warehouse operators. They are trying to lure companies to come to New Jersey. So warehouse operators like New Jersey's ports, they like their highway infrastructure, and they like their proximity to these millions of customers in the New York City metro area. So this is very common. New Jersey's trying to lure these companies in by providing them with tax incentives, tax breaks. So NFI Industries, they were awarded approximately $80 million in tax credits from the state of New Jersey. GoPuff was awarded $39 million in tax credits from the state of New Jersey. So you can see how this could make a big difference financially. Now we're going to skip this. Okay, let's talk about size. So let's first define how warehouse size is measured. So size is often determined, it's often defined in terms of square footage of floor space. So you essentially take the length, take the width of the building, and multiply them together, and you get your square foot. So public warehouses are usually going to use square foot dimensions in their advertising and promotion efforts when they're trying to get people to rent their warehouses. However, unfortunately, square footage is not the best measure to accurately capture how big a warehouse space is. It ignores the capability that we have with modern warehouses to store merchandise and inventory vertically, up and down. So again, we're only looking at how much space we have on the floor. We're not thinking about how high we can stack everything when we use a square foot dimension. So hence, the cubic space measure was developed. So this measures the cubic space of the entire facility, where we are actually taking into account the height of the facility. So cubic space refers to the amount of actual volume available within a facility. We're adding the variable of height, which takes into account how high can we store inventory. It's a much more realistic size estimate because it considers more of the available usable space in a warehouse. So again, cubed footage, cubed feet is a better way of measuring actual warehouse capacity as opposed to square footage. And again, we can build up. So a company can build mezzanines, they can build ceiling high shelves to expand their storage vertically. And cubic measurements actually give us a more accurate description of that actual warehouse size, where we can take into account the ability to build upwards, to store vertically. And the size of the warehouse. The size of the warehouse, how big or how small, is going to be determined based on the needs of the organization. Again, this is a really crucial decision. How big are we going to make our warehouse or our warehouses? So if we overestimate the warehouse size, this can result in a lot of unnecessary costs, because we're going to have unused space, unused energy, unused maintenance. Again, regardless of if we're only operating at half capacity, we're only using half of that warehouse space, we still have to pay all the bills. We still have to pay the rent. So we still have to pay our mortgage for this size. So we don't want to have to overestimate and pay all these unnecessary costs. Building utility and service costs represent a very significant portion of annual building costs. However, if we go the other direction and we underestimate the warehouse size that we need, this is going to result in a very overcrowded and inefficient warehouse operations. So there's a lot of different factors that influence how large a warehouse should be, and it's a very important decision as well. So typically, as a company's service levels increase, again, we want to shorten the lead time to deliver inventory to customers. It requires more warehousing space to provide storage for higher levels of inventory. Unless, so I'll caveat that, unless the throughput rate or turnover of products stored in the warehouse increases. So again, this is how quickly things are moving in and out of our warehouse. A small warehouse can store as much inventory as a large warehouse if the inventory velocity or turnover is sufficiently larger in that smaller facility. We're just working at a much higher velocity. Demand is also going to impact our warehouse size. So if demand fluctuates significantly or is very unpredictable, inventory levels are going to be higher because we're going to need more safety stock, that just in case inventory to give us a little bit of buffer. This means more storage space, and we're going to have a larger warehouse because of this. As a company, or perhaps just one warehouse serves more markets, additional warehouse space is normally required. Or if we have multiple products or multiple product groupings, especially if they're really, really diverse, larger warehouses will be required in order to maintain minimum inventory levels of every single product. And generally, if we've got big items, think of like barbecue grills, think of kayaks, generally greater space requirements are going to be needed when our products are very large. And again, also, sometimes in warehouses, there are additional offices for overhead types of staff. So your human resources, your procurement, your accounting, your sales, your IT people, they may have offices in your warehouses. We're going to need more space and need a larger warehouse if it's going to be housing these overhead staff individuals. Now let's talk about the number or how many warehouses we're going to be opening. So in deciding on the number or of how many warehouse facilities, there's 4 factors that are really significant. We've got a cost of our lost sales, we've got our inventory costs, we've got our warehousing costs, and we've got our transportation costs. So lost sales. So lost sales are very important to a firm. We do not want to lose sales. However, they're the most difficult to calculate and predict, and they're going to vary wildly by company and industry. If the cost of a lost sale is very high, we're probably going to want to expand the number of warehouses and have a high number of warehouses. But remember, there's always going to be cost service trade-offs. So we've got to determine what level of customer service, what level of lead time we want, and then develop the optimal number of warehouses to service these customers. And then we've got our inventory costs. Inventory costs are going to increase with the number of warehouses. So usually we are going to stock a minimum amount, that's going to be our safety stock, of all products at every single location. So that's going to affect how much it's going to, so the higher the number of warehouses are, the higher the inventory costs are going to be. Again, and the lower the number of warehouses are, the lower the inventory costs are going to be. So some companies, what they do is they'll have specific warehouses that are dedicated to a particular product or a particular product grouping. So that's how they kind of get away from that. But we've got to think about our inventory costs when it comes to the number of warehouses. And then our warehousing costs themselves. So warehousing costs obviously are going to increase with the number of warehouses that we open. More warehouses means more space to be owned, leased, or rented, and costs tend to increase at a decreasing rate after a number of warehouses are brought online, especially if we are leasing or renting the space. And then our transportation costs. So transportation costs are initially going to decline as the number of warehouses increases. However, after a number of warehouses increases to a certain point, we're probably not going to be able to ship our inventory or products in such large quantities, and we're going to have to pay a higher rate to our carriers. And we're probably going to have to start using LTL, less than truckload, where we're only paying for the actual portion of the truck space that we're using versus full truckload, where we have that entire cabin space and we are filling it to the gills. So we're going to lose transportation economies of scale if we open too many warehouses. And the size, how big a warehouse is, and the number, how many warehouses, are related. So usually these two factors have an inverse relationship. So as the number of warehouses increases, the average size of the warehouse decreases. And as the average number of warehouses decreases, the average size of a warehouse increases. So again, size and number in terms of warehouses, these two factors usually have an inverse relationship. They're going to do the opposite. So let's talk about warehouse layout and design. Where should products be placed within the warehouse? So an average warehouse usually contains thousands of different stock keeping units or SKUs. So this is a really important decision because it has a very critical effect on our efficiency and productivity. So a good warehouse layout can increase our output, improve product flow, it's going to reduce costs, and it's going to improve service to our customers. So where are we going to put the products within our warehouse? So the optimal warehouse layout and design for an organization is going to vary. Again, there's not some one tried and true tested method for every single company, every single industry. It's going to vary. It's going to vary based on the type of product being stored. It's going to vary on the availability of financial resources for that company. It's going to vary on the level and type of competition, and it's going to vary based on customer needs. And again, there are also various trade-offs between labor, equipment, space, and information. Again, there's always going to be trade-offs in supply chain. So, for example, the purchase of a very expensive but very efficient materials handling equipment can affect the optimal size of a warehouse facility. We may not need a facility that's quite as big because we've got a really good, really efficient materials handling equipment system. So here's just some examples of some different layouts of how warehouses could be designed. And you see here, they can vary. And again, it's going to vary wildly based on a lot of different factors. So there isn't some one tried and true tested right layout for every single company. So storage depends on where we're going to store things. It's going to depend on things like our product characteristics. How big is the product? How much does it weigh? The characteristics of the storage slots. What is the maximum height and width of these storage areas? What is the demand changes? Is it seasonal changes, or is it a product with a very consistent evergreen type of demand? So within a warehouse, the two primary ways products can be located or arranged within that warehouse are random storage and dedicated storage. So let's start off with random storage. So this is sometimes called a floating slot storage, and this method places items in any available slot, bin, or rack. And then products are then retrieved on a first in, first out basis. So usually this is not, when we think of a warehouse in our mind, again, look at this picture. This looks chaotic. This looks disorganized. This does not really, you don't really think of this type of organizational strategy when you think of a warehouse, but it's actually very good in certain circumstances. So it creates diversity across all storage areas. It reduces potential for bottlenecks and it maximizes space utilization. Although it can require longer travel times, between order picking, and often results in lower inventory accuracy. But randomized systems often employ pretty much you have to have a very advanced computerized system in order and specialized software. And it often uses ASRS, automatic retrieval systems, which really minimize labor and handling costs. So let's take a look at this video. So this random storage is the methodology that Amazon uses for storage in many of their fulfillment centers. So let's take a look at this video where it talks about how Amazon uses random storage in their fulfillment centers. Oops. Okay, so you can see how Amazon utilizes it. And again, on initial glance, it looks disorganized, it looks chaotic, but it works. It creates diversity. And then we've got our dedicated storage. So in a dedicated or fixed storage system, this is when products are stored in permanent locations within a warehouse. It's very similar to the storage that you see in a retail store. If you are buying cereal, it is always going to be in aisle 12, always. Same thing goes with a dedicated or fixed storage system in a warehouse. The cereal is always going to be on aisle 12. So, for example, if a certain electrical transformer is stored within a warehouse in aisle 12, shelf A, it's always going to be found there and nowhere else in a dedicated storage. This is typically when we think of a warehouse, this is typically what we think of. So each individual stock keeping unit or SKU or item is assigned a very specific storage location. It could be a bin, it could be a specific shelf, it could be a specific aisle, it could be a specific location on the floor. So that SKU will always be stored in that specific location. No other SKU may be stored there. Even though the bin is empty and there's space available, you can't just put any old SKU in there. And it usually has a lower space utilization, but much higher accuracy, because it's very easily, you can just eyeball it and see if something is out of place, and it just kind of makes sense logically. So in terms of overall warehouse layout for a dedicated storage approach, products may be grouped according to their compatibility, according to how complementary they are, and according to their popularity. So compatibility. This refers to how well products may be stored together. So think about an animal shelter. You are typically not going to store your inventory, your dogs and your cats. You're probably not going to put your dogs and your cats in cages right next to each other because we know that they're not compatible. they are going to be snarling, they're going to be barking, they're going to be hissing. These products are not stored well together. It's going to make more sense if we have one room where we have all the cats and we have one room where we have all the dogs, because usually the cats will be compatible with each other and the dogs will be compatible with each other. So some examples. So some pharmaceuticals cannot be stored in the same vicinity or in the same area as some bagged agricultural chemicals because of certain federal regulations, so required by law. Or automobile tires and certain consumer appliances were previously unable to be stored together because they were not compatible. So the chemical vapors that were given off by the tires had some sort of reaction with the pigments in the appliance paint, which would result in the paint color actually changing on these appliances. And then the appliances would either have to be repainted or they would have to be sold at a deep discount. So again, we've got to ensure that the products are actually compatible to be stored together. And complementary. So this refers to how often products are ordered together and should therefore be stored together. So you see here, I've got a picture of peanut butter and jelly. So a lot of times these two products are bought together because we like to eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And a perfect example, if you go to the grocery store, many times the peanut butter and the jelly are located together. The same thing would happen in a warehouse because these are complementary items. So, for example, in a warehouse, maybe laptops, monitors, pens, pencils, desk chairs, all kinds of office supplies. These are all complementary products. They're usually all ordered together. So they're usually stored in very close proximity to each other. So we've got to think about how often products are ordered together, how complementary they are. So we should therefore store them together. And then popularity. So popularity in terms of warehouses refers to the fact that products are going to have different inventory turnover rates, or they're going to have different demand rates. So how fast are these items flying off the shelves? If they're super popular items, they're moving fast. You can't keep them on the shelves. If they're very unpopular, they're going to be moving very slow. They may hang out on our shelves for a very long period of time. So items that are in the greatest demand and we're seeing them move fast, we would ideally like to store these closest to the shipping receiving docks. So we want to put them as close as possible to minimize that picking distance, and put them very close to wherever they're going to be coming in and out. And the slow moving items should be stored elsewhere at kind of more remote locations within the warehouses. So think about like your closet. You probably have a decent amount of clothes, but you really only wear maybe the same 10 things day to day. Now, in terms of the layout and design and organization of your closet, you're probably not going to put your tuxedo that you wear to a wedding once every 2 years or your prom dress right in the front of your closet. You're probably going to have that packed away way in the back. You know that you don't need that very often. Put it in the back so it's kind of out of the way, but you're going to want to have your most popular outfits that you wear pretty much every single day right at the front of your closet, so it's very easily accessible. The same thing goes with warehouses. So warehouse best practices. So again, we've had an entire chapter on warehousing. Warehousing is a very important part of most supply chains. It's been estimated that warehouse operations can account for 30 to 50% of most companies' supply chain costs. So it's very vital that these storage facilities operate at peak effectiveness and peak efficiency. And this usually involves breaking down the warehouse's processes into components and determining if any of them can be done any better. So that is it for warehousing section 2. And I will catch you here in the next chapter. Thank you.